Chapter 24, Risa. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't at least a little surprised to find out that Georgia technically owns Russell's Ford. I don't know why I never made that connection. There had been talk over the years, people wondering where Mike got the money because all the banks had turned him down. I'd even suspected my parents of helping him out. I don't know why the thought never crossed my mind that Georgia might have been his banker. But I was even more surprised to find out that she's calling Mike's loan and turning the dealership over to me and Ryan. Maybe it was Mama's death that woke me up, but I was seeing more clearly now than ever. My bitter hatred toward Georgia had evaporated right along with Mama's life. I let it go. I forgave Georgia for leaving me here. Only then could I accept that it was my fault. I could have gone out to LA with her, but I let love blind me. Well, I wasn't going to do that again. Tango sure was happy to hear that Georgia and I wanted to take the stage together. I think everybody else was shocked, except for maybe Tommy. He'd gone home to get Georgia's guitar. She said if we were going to do this, we were going to do it right. I'll admit I was looking forward to it. George and I waited in the dressing room for Tommy to return. "What do you want to sing?" she asked me. "I don't know," I said with a shrug. I hadn't sang anything in so long. I was actually shocked that I made it through the song at Mama's funeral without flubbing it up too badly. So I said, "Are you sure you want me to come out to LA to record your song?" Was she for real? Could I do it? "Yes, I am," Georgia said, and leaned toward me to touch my hand. "I want you to come with me," she said, "and I want you to stay there. Let's make all your dreams come true." She looked at me and smiled before adding, "Besides, Lisa's going to be there." That was true. And so was Malibu. I couldn't help but wonder how he'd react to my going out to LA. Would he shower me with as much attention there as he did here? Just thinking about it made my heart flutter. "Question is," Georgia said, "are you truly ready to leave Mike behind?" I knew Mike's future depended upon me. If I divorced him, Georgia would take the dealership. But I wasn't responsible for Mike's future happiness. He had relieved me of that obligation when he decided to cheat on me. I said, "Mike and I are done." She said, "And you know what I'm going to do?" I nodded, saying, "Yes, I do, and I'm okay with it." I shrugged, then added, "Like Mama always said, he made his bed, and now he's got to lay in it." Georgia said, "Let's concentrate on the future then. Your future. You can stay here. You and Ryan have the dealership." She paused. My sister's certainty rang out in her tone as she added, "Or you can come with me out to LA and pursue your dreams. It's your choice." Well, I felt like a heel. After all these years of holding a grudge against Georgia, I was finding out that she'd been responsible for my well-being all this time. And even now, she was still trying to make sure that I had a bright future. I said, "I suck as a sister." I looked at her straight in the eye because anything less would have been taking the easy way out. I said, "I'm sorry, Georgia," and I meant it. She said, "You don't have anything to be sorry about," and that surprised me. Then she added playfully, "Unless we piss off Tango by not getting out there before last call." And we both laughed. "So, what'll we sing?" I asked. She said, "You remember Centerfield?" I said with a nod, "I think so." I cleared my throat, then added, I'm sure people wouldn't mind seeing you play 25 or 64, though. Chapter 25, Ginger. Some might say it was in bad taste for us to congregate at tangos right after Mama's funeral. But just knowing that Reese and Georgia had taken the stage together for the second time today would make it okay with my mother. While they were performing their first song, John Fogerty's Centerfold, Tommy came to the table I was sharing with Malibu and Blue and took the last vacant chair. I leaned toward Tommy and said, "Where'd she get that guitar?" A nostalgic smile overtook his face. He said, "It's a little something I had stashed away." "You play?" I asked. "Since when?" "Nah," he shrugged and added, "You don't recognize it?" I shook my head. "It's Ronnie's guitar," he said, "the one Georgia used to audition for the band." "Really?" I said. And Tommy had ended up with it. I was damn near speechless. Still, I managed to say, "Well, don't that just dill my pickle?" Tommy laughed, took a drink of his beer, and looked back at the stage. More specifically, at Georgia. When the song ended, Georgia looked at Risa and said, "You want to do another one?" "Sure," Risa said into her microphone. "But you know what everybody wants to hear." Georgia shrugged, so Risa added, "You know the one." Georgia looked down at our table and tossed Tommy a "Should I look?" Tommy nodded, and Georgia barreled into the familiar riff of Chicago's 25 or 64, and I swear a hush fell over the crowd. We all sat there, simply mesmerized as Georgia made that guitar do things that I'm sure most people wouldn't have thought possible. I'd always been proud of Georgia's accomplishments, so the feeling overwhelming me now was nothing new. But it had been a long time since I'd seen my sister Risa on stage, and now, listening to that golden voice of hers again made me incredibly proud. My sisters were teeming with talent. They must have obviously gotten my share. Blue scooted closer to me and draped his arm around the back of my chair. It seemed the more I tried to put distance between us, the more he tried to close the gap. I'll admit, I was enjoying it. Apparently, that old adage, "the fastest way to a man's heart is through his stomach," was not true. At least, not in Blue's case. He seemed to want what he thought he couldn't have. When Georgia and Risa finished their song, Georgia covered her mic with her hand and said something to Risa. I wasn't much of a lip reader, but what I thought she said blew my mind. Risa moved towards Georgia and they conversed for a while, then Risa stepped back up to her mic. Georgia removed her hand from her own mic and said, "As y'all know, Risa and I haven't performed together in a really long time, so our repertoire is rather limited." She snuck a glimpse at Tommy before continuing. "We do want to do one more song for my niece, Risa's daughter, Lisa, and her new husband, Ethan, before we go. But I do want to let y'all know, though, that I've written a little song for an upcoming movie, and Risa has agreed to come out to LA to record it." The audience erupted, and my eyes got misty as my sister continued. "But right now, we want to do a song for the newlyweds." Georgia paused, searching the crowd. I followed her gaze to Lisa and Ethan, who were sitting at the bar. "So come on up," Georgia coaxed them. Reluctantly, Ethan and Lisa made their way to the dance floor, while Georgia began a riff that I recognized, but I couldn't quite place it. Ethan took Lisa in his arms, and as soon as Risa started singing, I recognized the old April Wine tune, "Just Between You and Me." When the second verse rolled around, Blue pulled me to my feet, and we joined Lisa and Ethan on the dance floor. After that, it didn't take long for others to join us. When are you going back to L.A.? Blue asked. I looked up at him and shrugged. Hell if I knew. I asked, why? He said casually, I thought we could go together. I'll be returning with my kids, I said. Remember them? Yeah, he laughed. I like them. They like me. I said, they don't like you. Yes, they do, he said surely. You sure think a lot of yourself, I said. So do you, he said. So do I thought. What does that mean? So do I think a lot of myself? Or so do I think a lot of him? The song ended and I was glad of it. That gave me the perfect opportunity to pull away from Blue. And just in time, too. If I hadn't, I would have started making a fool of myself. I turned away from him and started back for our table. Risa and Georgia were thanking everyone for sticking around. Malibu had stood up. He was looking toward the stage, and the smile faded from his face. What's up? I said to him as I picked up my Modelo and took a sip. Hey, he said, shrugging it off. Georgia gave me the car keys. Are you going to need a ride? I actually let that question roll around in my head for a minute. Then I said, no, I'll catch a ride with Blue. I knew it was a bad idea, but I couldn't forget what Mama had said to me. He wants you now more than ever. Chapter 26, Risa. Georgia and I headed off stage when we both saw Mike coming our way. It was very deja vu-ish. She turned to me asking, Are you sure about Mike? Mike and I are done, I said. Okay, Georgia said in a warning voice. I'm giving my lawyers the go-ahead. Mike is not going to be happy. I said, who cares? And I really didn't. Tommy was following Mike to be Georgia's protector, I'm sure. And I said, he's got no one to blame but himself. Mike stopped in front of Georgia and pointed his finger in her face, saying, You're not going to get away with this. Tommy stepped between them, saying, Back off, Mike. Mike raised his hands like he was surrendering or something. I mean, Tommy was the sheriff after all. I'll see you in court, he said to Georgia and moved past her and Tommy, coming closer to me. He looked at me and, serious as all get out, he says, Your sister is trying to take the dealership from us. Us? That's rich. I said, No, Mike, she's taking it from you and giving it to me and Ryan. Mike stood there in silence for a minute. I could see the wheels turning in his head. Okay, he finally said, somewhat calmer. If she's giving it to you, that's cool. Then it's still ours. I thought, no, Mike, it's not still ours. Mike, I shook my head, saying, Why are you here? For you, babe, he said. I'm here for you. Yeah, okay, breezed through my thoughts. Mike had never, not once, put anybody before him. I appreciate your concern, I said. I'll be fine. I'm heading out to L.A. with Georgia. He said, I know, babe, it's fantastic. And then he had the nerve to hug me. This is exactly what we've always wanted, success. I'll tweak the tune to make sure it's a hit. And there we have it. Now that I was going out to California to record Georgia's song, Mike wanted in. He was also delusional if he thought my superstar sister needed any help from him when it came to creating hits. I pushed him off me, saying, Mike, it's over. He asked, You going to throw everything we have away? Then he cut me with a glare as he said, It's not over. Which in his mind meant it wasn't over until he said it was over. Like I said, clearly delusional. It is over, Mike, I said in a calm yet firm tone. You and I are done. I'm giving you that divorce you wanted. As I walked away, I heard Mike calling after me, Risa, wait, I'm sorry. You're sorry, I thought. I'll just bet. I kept going. It was too little too late. I saw Ginger and Jeffrey Dean at the table, but Malibu was gone. "That's awesome, sis," Ginger said to me as I walked up to them. Jeffrey Dean nodded. "Thanks," I said. "It was fun." I looked around. Malibu wasn't anywhere inside the bar. So I asked, "Do you know where Malibu went?" Ginger said, "I think he went home." "Really?" I said. "Why on earth would he do that?" I'd gotten used to Malibu sticking around to flirt with me. Why did he stop? As if Jeffrey Dean read my mind, he said, "I think he saw you and Mike hugging," he added dramatically. I blew out my frustration with a sigh. Ginger said, "Go after him." "Maybe it's better this way," I said. "It's not better this way," Ginger scoffed. "I see the way you light up when he's around." She looked me in the eye, adding, "And I see that same light go out when he's not around." I shook my head, saying, "I don't need to set myself up for another heartbreak." Ginger grabbed me by the shoulders, turned me around, saying, "Go talk to him," before she pushed me toward the door. I supposed I should. I was going out to L.A. with Georgia. I was bound to run into him, and I didn't want it to be awkward. Chapter 27, Georgia. Tommy and I left Tango's and headed back to his house. The truck's headlights cut a narrow path in the darkness. I'd forgotten how black the night could be out in the country. Tommy reached for my hand and squeezed it. I wrapped my fingers around his, looked at him, and smiled. I said, "I'm kind of surprised that Kathy didn't show up at Tango's tonight." Tommy laughed. "Her husband is not Tango's material." Well, I thought, thank the Lord for small favors. But out loud, I asked, "No?" "Did you really want her to show up?" Tommy asked. He gave me one of those, "Why are we talking about Kathy" looks as we rolled down his long driveway. Hell no, breezed through my thoughts, but I simply shook my head and kept my mouth shut. Tommy shifted into park and killed the engine. We got out of the truck and met at the front. He draped his arm around my shoulders, and we headed for the house. Inside, he hung his keys by the door and went to the fridge. "Want a beer?" he offered. "Sure," I said. He grabbed 2 bottles of Quilmes, and I followed him into the living room. We sat down on the couch. He opened a beer and handed it to me. I sipped it, and he opened it. Tommy tossed both bottle caps on the coffee table and then said, "So, when are you going back to L.A.? "I'm not sure," I said. It took a minute before he spoke again. "Reese is going with you?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "I think it'll be good for her. Plus, I hate to break Malibu's heart by leaving her here." Tommy chuckled. "He does have it bad for her, doesn't he?" "Yeah," I laughed. Tommy's tone took on a serious quality when he said, "Tell him not to hurt her. Reese has been through a lot. She deserves a shot at happiness." I looked at Tommy. He was genuinely worried about my sister. It made my heart melt. "You know," I said, "I've never seen Malibu like this. He's always been the love 'em and leave 'em kind of guy. This is new, but I like it." Tommy said with a shrug, "Maybe they'll get together out there." "Stranger things have happened," I said. He fidgeted with a label on his beer. "What about you and me?" he asked, and didn't look at me. "Well," I said, "we can work it out." Tommy said, without much hope, "Long-distance relationships are tough, Georgia." "I know," I said. I looked at Tommy and said, "I'll come back, though, I promise." And I meant it. "And you can come out to L.A., I suggested, just to see what he'd say. Mama's words were echoing in my ear. Tell him you want to stay here with him. I'd promised Mama, but I just couldn't say the words. If Tommy wanted me to stay here with him, he'd tell me. Chapter 28, Risa. I was relieved when I rolled up to my parents' house and saw Georgia's rental car in the driveway. That meant Malibu was here. There was a chill in the air, but it wasn't from the temperature. This day had started out on a bad note, what with Mama's funeral, and apparently it wasn't going to get any better. I ambled along the walkway toward the front porch and saw Malibu sitting in the swing. He had claimed the center spot and had his arms draped along the swing's back. I climbed the steps leading up to the porch and leaned against the column at the top of the landing. I said, "I was looking for you at Tango's." "I'm not there," he said, without looking at me. "So I see," I said, and pushed myself off the column and stepped toward the swing. He didn't move, but I sat down anyway. I was sitting right up against him. Still, he didn't move. So I said, "This is cozy." He cut his eyes toward me, but he didn't actually look at me. "What are you doing here?" he asked. "Looking for you," I said. He responded in a chilly tone. "Why?" I felt my jaw clench. I let out a huff before saying, "So, you flirt with me incessantly until it's time for you to go home?" That got his attention. His eyes zeroed in on mine and he didn't let go. He said, "Don't try to turn the tables on me." "What's your problem?" I asked, practically stomping my foot. "Nothing." He grumbled and looked away. He said, "It's not a big deal. Don't worry about it." "Malibu," my voice softened. "I thought we were friends." He glanced back at me and said, "Me too." He shrugged, then suggesting that he'd given up. I said, "I'm coming out to LA with Georgia, you know." He said, "That's what I'm afraid of," staring off into the darkness in front of us. Why? The direct desperation to know was eating me up. Ginger and Jeffrey Dean were sure he'd been upset about Mike hugging me. I was beginning to think they were wrong, so I said, "Are you afraid I'm going to cramp your style?" Malibu shook his head, laughed, then looked at me. "Don't you get it?" he asked. "I can't stand the thought of having to watch you and your husband living all happy and shit." That shocked me a little, but I said with certainty, "The only way Mike and I are going to live happily ever after is as far apart as possible. We're getting divorced." "Are you sure?" he asked, like he really thought I might be mistaken. Malibu said, "He told me that you two were getting back together, and he's going out to LA with you to manage you." "What?" fell out of my mouth. I couldn't believe the audacity of that man. Mike, not Malibu. I shook my head and said, "That couldn't be further from the truth." As soon as George and I were done playing tonight, I told him it was over. Mike and I are truly done. "You mean that?" Malibu asked. He let his arm drop down around my shoulders, snuggling me closer to him, if that's possible. "I most definitely mean that," I said. "And you and me?" he asked hopefully. Part of me, after dealing with Mike, felt like I was walking into a trap. But there was something between Malibu and me, something that made it impossible for me to go back to Mike. If I had, I would have done so, knowing I'd always be thinking about another man. Chapter 29, Ginger. 2 days later. Twilight had descended upon Cypress Falls, and it was just as tranquil as it had been when I was a kid. On nights like this, I used to sit on the dock by the river behind our house, and that's where I was now. Mama's advice kept bouncing around inside my head. Tell Jeffrey Dean how you feel. Trouble was, I was afraid. Blue and I weren't kids anymore. I was in my 40s and no longer the girl he used to have a thing for. Hell, I couldn't keep his attention back then. What made Mama think I could now? I heard footsteps coming up behind me. I didn't need to look to know who it was. I sucked in a breath and waited. Blue took his time sitting down beside me. He asked, "Remember how you used to wait out here for me?" Yeah, I thought. Yeah, I did. Sometimes he'd come by in his dad's boat and we'd cruise the river. It's funny how some of the simplest things make the fondest memories. I couldn't help asking, "What's your point?" "My point is," he said, "you and I, we had some good times, didn't we?" "Yeah," I said with a shrug, then added, "right up until you broke up with me." "I didn't dump you," Blue said, shaking his head. "You dumped me." "How do you figure?" I asked. He said, "I asked you not to go. You went anyway." Blue went silent for a second or two, then added, "You dumped me." I laughed, and not in a good way. I said, "Are you really trying to pick a fight with me right now? For God's sakes, my mother had just died." The desire to cry snuck up on me. Jeffrey Dean wrapped me in his arms, saying, "I didn't mean to make you cry." He kissed the side of my head and brushed my hair back with his fingers. "It's not you, not really," I said, and covered my face with my hands. This whole week had been way too much for a woman like me to handle. "Good," he said, and breathed a sigh of relief before adding, "because I swore to myself I'd never hurt you again." He brushed my tears away. "I'm sorry," he said. "I was an idiot back then." My laughter pealed out amid my tears. I said, "No argument there." "Forgive me?" He said it like he really meant it. All I could do was nod. Then he said, "Good." He opened his embrace, keeping one arm around me as we both went back to gazing out at the river. He said, "I'm moving out to LA, you know." Wasn't sure if I was afraid of that or excited about it. I said, "So, you are taking that sportscasting job then?" "Yes, I am," Blue said, then began swinging his feet between the dock and the river. Then he looked at me and added, "But only because you're there." I said, "We both know that's not true." He shot back, "On the contrary." Yeah, I thought, but said out loud, "So, if I said I was moving back here?" "Yeah, right," he said with a laugh, then shrugged, adding, "Then I'd stay here." "Liar," I said softly. He said, "I was kind of hoping you'd let me stay at your house." I looked at him. His face was stoic. I couldn't tell if he was joking or not, so I asked, "Won't I cramp your style?" "Baby," he said, hugging me again, "you are my style." I shook my head, and before I could become any more love-struck, I said, "Okay, but you gotta pick up after yourself." "I'll hire us a maid," Jeffrey Dean said, "a French one." So I said, "Make sure he's cute." Chapter 30, Georgia. I'm not sure exactly when I made the decision, but by the time we all got to the airport, I knew I wasn't leaving with everyone else. Even without me, Ginger was returning home with far more people than we'd left with. In addition to Malibu, now Risa, Lisa, Ethan, Justin, Diana, and Jeffrey Dean were all tagging along, which is why I went ahead and chartered a private jet. I stuck around to see them off. When the plane was safely in the air, I headed back to Tommy's place. I was almost sad that he hadn't come to the airport to see me off or to ask me to stay. But I knew Tommy would never do either. If he came to see me off, he wouldn't be able to stop himself from asking me to stay. And Tommy would look at asking me to stay like he was asking me to give up my dream. As I made my way across the parking lot, I glanced up at the sky and thought, "You were right, Mama. If Tommy and I were going to have a future together, I was going to have to set it in motion." It took me half an hour to get to Tommy's house. By the time I arrived, I was bubbling over with anticipation. Driving up the long driveway, I saw him go into the barn. I parked my rental car beside his truck, got out and went to the barn to look for him. He was talking to a man, I figured for one of his employees. They looked up at me and Tommy smiled when his eyes met mine. "Go up to the house," he said. "I'll be up in a minute." I nodded and backed up a couple of steps before turning and heading out. I went to the swing on the back porch to wait for him. It seemed like forever, but really, it was only a couple of minutes before he rounded the corner of the house and climbed the steps up to the porch. He sat down on the swing beside me and asked, "What are you doing here?" I shrugged. He looked at me with a hint of a smile, tipping the corners of his lips. He added, "I figured you'd be long gone by now." Now it was my turn, just 4 little words. "I want to stay." And I couldn't get any of them to tumble out of my mouth, so I shrugged. That's all I could do. "I'm sorry I didn't come to the airport," he said. "It's just hard to watch you leave." I managed to say, "I don't want to leave." I looked at Tommy. Well, it was now or never, so I said, "I'm going to stay here. I figure I can move in with Daddy." I shrugged, at least until I find my own place. Tommy looked at me like he was waiting for the other shoe to drop. "Are you sure?" he finally asked. I nodded. He said, "I'd rather you move in here." Then he pointed to a clearing in the trees halfway between the house and the river. He said, "I could build you a recording studio right back there." And my heart just about melted. I asked, "You'd do that for me?" Tommy laughed a little and said, "Georgia, don't you know by now I'd do anything for you?" Epilogue. 1 year later. Georgia Franklin doesn't get out to L.A. much anymore. Not since her husband built that state-of-the-art recording studio in their backyard in Cypress Falls. When she does head to L.A., she's always accompanied by her husband, Tommy Dixon. Ethan and Lisa are living happily in L.A. The newlyweds are both attending classes at UCLA. Russell's Ford is now Franklin's Ford and is owned and operated by Ryan Franklin. Ryan co-owns the dealership with his sister Risa. Mike Russell is currently unemployed and living in his parents' garage in Cypress Falls. Ginger and Blue got married a couple of days ago and are currently honeymooning in Greece. Blue's sister Kathy has recently become a divorcee again. Her 3 children have opted to live with their father. After recording Georgia's song, Risa decided to stay in L.A. where she could be closer to her daughter. Risa has recently become engaged to L.A.'s hotshot events planner, Malibu Drake. Georgia and Risa are currently co-writing an album. They plan to start recording this summer in Cypress Falls. This has been The Lonely Hearts Club, Southern Charmers, Book 2, written and read by Sandra Edwards. Copyright 2015 by Sandra Edwards. Production copyright 2020 by Sandra Edwards.